This is a normal 3DS. Pretty standard and nothing special about it. And over here is a 3DS that I just modified. Let me tell you what's so special about it. So on my desk here, I have a 3DS and a 3DS capture board. So let me take you back a little bit. Obviously, we know once the Switch came out, it changed everything. But there was two things that every kid wanted in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. First was to play those console games on the go. But second was to be able to play your handheld games on the TV. And this board sort of allows you to do that second option. Now for clarity, you can't just output this straight to a TV. With the way that the 3DS was engineered, it was never meant for the average consumer to be able to output it. And it's not completely like the Game Boy lines either, where you can kind of tap into the video signal and just have it output to some AV cables. There's a lot more magic that needs to go on decoding this, especially because it has two screens. But you could always plug in your 3DS to a laptop or computer or Raspberry Pi and have that hooked up to your TV so that you can play your games on the big screen. Now, to install this mod, you do need to nearly disassemble the entire machine outside of buttons, cameras, and screens. So it's a bit complicated and tedious, especially if you're doing it for the first time. You also have to do some internal and external cutting on the shell to be able to fit it the card. So unfortunately, if you're not super careful, you could have a really bad result visually. Quick note from when removing the bottom, be sure to lift away from the SD card reader, as there's two ribbon cables that connect the left and right bumper that are very easy to snap off. But the goal of this is to be a short walkthrough process on how to do this. I'm not going to speak on every detail of the disassembly, but I will note a few key things that you may need to know, because it could be different depending on when you bought your 3DS, because there were a few internal revisions. Now, as you can see here, I just removed the circle pad and it was a little dirty, so I cleaned off underneath so there was no stiffness. And now I'm going to be removing the SD card slot, and underneath it, there's a thin layer of adhesive. Now, obviously, I'd recommend using a plastic spudger, but I don't have that here for this video. You could be a little bit less gentle if you're pulling it up towards where the circle pad is, because there's nothing really important that you could possibly hit, unlike on the other side where there's ribbon cables underneath. Now, I'm going to quickly undo all these ribbon cables, remove the Wi-Fi card, and I'm actually going to leave the microphone in just because, as long as you're careful, it's a little bit redundant to take it out. Just make sure you lightly pry the foam out of the plastic shell, and then we're going to unscrew these 4 little screws here. Now you're going to be able to lift the motherboard from its plastic shell, but just know underneath the charge port there's also another bit of thin adhesive. Now when trying to remove the motherboard, slowly lift it up towards the cartridge slot. This is because there's one more ribbon cable underneath that connects to the top screen that you don't want to put too much pressure on or accidentally rip out, because replacing the top screen in a 3DS is extremely difficult. Now that we have the motherboard out, we're almost at the fun part. But first, I like to clear out the bottom first and do the cutting needed to be able to fit the capture board inside. Honestly, this is the most important step for a lot of people because you want it to look nice outside. Yeah, you want the capture port, but you also want it to look flush and nice. And I have a tip for that. But for the most part, we could be a little bit messy here. So we're gonna need to cut out a huge rectangular shape. And to do that, we're gonna need to remove this piece of plastic that holds in the stylus and the little rubber that protects the SD card slot. We're not going to reduce the function of any of it, just make it a little bit smaller so that it doesn't take up so much space so that we can fit the capture board inside. First, I'm going to take some clippers and I'm going to cut down this rubber SD card protector, but still leave one loop so it can still latch onto the plastic shell. Now we're going to go outside real quick because I need to use a Dremel, and obviously I don't want plastic to go everywhere. Now I'm going to show you this little tip that I was talking about earlier. The capture board's going to be seated near the bottom of the shell right here, and there's a little screw hole that you can use to line up where the port is going to be. My tip here is to use a permanent marker and draw on the outside of the shell so that you can see where the port is going to line up. Now we're going to grab that piece of plastic that holds in the DS stylus and orient it like a P. Then take a Dremel and cut vertically about where I'm cutting. And then save the piece of plastic that you just slivered off. And then go ahead and screw back on the SD card protector. Now we're going to go ahead and cut off the stem of our P and then screw that back onto the bottom shell. Now we're going to go ahead and cut a big rectangle out of the bottom shell. The references I use for the shape of the cutout are I start at the bottom of the stylus, at the bottom of the SD card rubber, and a little bit past the center of the headphone jack. Now for this section of cutting, you don't have to worry about it looking too pretty because it's going to be covered up by the bottom cover of the 3DS. No one will ever see the mess that you made. I'm just going to let this section play out for a little bit so that you can observe. Now comes the eye test and the guess and check section. This is the part that you want to look pretty because it sticks out like a sore thumb if it doesn't. Use those Sharpie marks that you just made and slowly mill down where the mini USB port is going to be. You're probably going to have to put in and take out the capture board a couple of times until it fits flush and looks the way that you want it to look. Finally, there's a little bit of plastic that sticks up right around where the board goes, just next to the mini USB port. You're going to want to take a ball tip or a sander from your Dremel and mill that down until it's completely flat. Then finally, to make things pretty, I recommend going in with an X-Acto knife and shaping up that port where the mini USB is going to be. Now you're not quite done. What you want to do is you want to put that bottom shell back on the 3DS. You don't have to put the motherboard back in, but find where that hole is going to be and then take a Sharpie and then mark the little piece of plastic that's sticking up. You're going to want to take your X-Acto knife again and cut off that little piece of the border and quickly double check that everything looks right. Before we begin soldering, you're going to need to cut this little flap off the flat circuit. There's markings on where you need to cut, so it's not that difficult. You can either use an X-Acto knife like I did or a pair of scissors. Now we can start soldering. First, line up the printed circuit with all of the correct solder points. On later revisions, this might be slightly more difficult as the motherboard of the 3DS has no test point markings. Now we're going to apply a little flux here. I usually like to solder the flat circuit to the test points that connect to the lower screen first to get it to hold into place. I usually solder just a couple points at random and then revise them once everything is lined up and secure. Now that that's all in place, I'm going to go ahead and clean it up with some isopropyl alcohol. Now I'm going to quickly revise that area again, applying some more flux and solder, making sure that all those points are bald and flat with the motherboard. And then after that, we're going to move up top to the points that still connect a little bit more of the lower screen and top screen and the camera data. Now we're going to fold over that little piece of the circuit that you cut earlier, and we're going to line it up with the cluster of 137, 138, and 140. I would say that this is the second most difficult thing to do working on newer revisions of 3DSs where the points are not labeled. I usually recommend putting a little bit of flux and rough solder on 139 first. Since it's the point that's the most inward, it allows an easier and more flat surface to solder the other 2 points, and then once those are soldered down, you can fix 139. Now we're going to measure and cut a thin copper wire and solder it to this capacitor up by the buttons and solder that thin copper wire to the upper solder pad on our flat circuit. Then finally we're going to take another ultra thin copper wire and solder it to test point 5 and then solder the other end of that wire to the bottom solder pad on our flat circuit. Now, as you can see in this video, and I cannot stress this enough, make sure to tension test these wires. Make sure that they're secure because it will be a huge pain if they come up, and I promise they will if you do not check. Once you finish soldering, make sure to use isopropyl alcohol to clean up all that extra flux on the board, and now you can start reassembling the machine. Now here's kind of the last tricky part of the assembly, which is putting the SD card reader and the circle pad back on. As you could see on the flat circuit, there's a little hole that the ribbon cable that connects the circle pad to the motherboard needs to go through. Now this could be especially difficult on newer revisions as they shrink the length of the circle pad's ribbon cable. Luckily for me, this is an older model, so I have to deal with the long ribbon cable. I recommend putting these two components back in the order that I put them in, because putting the SD card reader in before the circle pad will make it more difficult for you to insert the circle pad. Now the only thing that's tricky about putting in that SD card reader is reconnecting it to the motherboard. What I recommend doing is screwing down the SD card reader first, and then using a pair of tweezers to try and maneuver it back over to the plug where the cable slots in. Okay, we should be all done now, so now we're going to go ahead and reapply the bottom shell and plug in those bumpers. And then we're just going to put 1 or 2 screws to hold down the bottom plate, just so that we can test out if everything functions properly. Now, as you can see, the device functions properly, which means that there's no pressure being put on the bottom screen. And as you can see here, I get a little bit ahead of myself and start reassembling the whole machine, but that's only because I've done this so many times and I'm pretty confident that it will work. Alright, now that we're finally done assembling this machine, we can test it out. And look at that, it outputs right to my computer. Now if you guys enjoyed this video and you want to see more projects like this, I want to post more videos like this to my LinkedIn, but they take a long time to make, so all likes would be appreciated. I'll also be uploading this to YouTube, so hope and find a wider audience and help people learn how to do this. And in the description, I'll also include all the tools I used on this project, what microphone I recorded with, and what I edited with. Hopefully I'll see you guys again soon, and thank you for watching. Also, please leave any suggestions you have in the comments.